Welcome everyone to Speakin My Piece, hosted by Dekel Bor and presented by Jazz Times in association with Rope-a-Dope. This is a great program. We're just getting started. Each week, Dekel spends an hour with some of the greatest artists of our time, digging deep into their motivation, technique, and just casually discussing life. Today we have the great pleasure of welcoming, and this comes straight from the Wikipedia page, jazz drummer, composer, singer, producer, educator, and entrepreneur. And I was really happy to see entrepreneur in there because here at Rope-a-Dope we believe just about every artist has to be an entrepreneur these days. She was mentored by the great Jack DeJohnette. This is Lyne Carrington, and she's won 3 Grammy Awards. She's performed with greats like Dizzy Gillespie, Stan Getz, Clark Terry, Herbie Hancock, many, many more. Her recent album, Lyne Carrington in Social Science, Waiting Game, was out on Martino in November 2019, and I have a suspicion that when we come to the Grammy Awards next year, we're going to see her name. She caught my eye and ears, especially with the last album, because of several artists that were very familiar to me, Aaron Parks, Matthew Stevens, and Morgan Guerin, all part of Social Science. Guitarist Dekel Bor, who we'll welcome in a moment, has performed with jazz legends Johnny Griffin, Reggie Workman, Pat Martino, Billy Hart, and more. His recent release, Let Love Rule, was released this year and is available at dekelbor.bandcamp.com. I want to also mention as we come in today that you can also see on Tuesdays at 3 o'clock Dekel's program called On the Record, running on the Shore and Rope-a-Dope channels every Tuesday at 3 p.m. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dekel Bor from Berlin. How are you?
I'm happy to be with you, and I'm super excited about this. I've been waiting for this for about a couple of months now. The story with Teri Lynn and I never got to meet her in person, but my musical father, Robert Satan, has been trying to get me on the same page with her for years. He's always been saying, "You have to get in touch with Teri Lynn. I have to get the two of you guys in a room." So one thing led to another, and here we are. So Teri Lynn, I'm just so happy to be doing this with you. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm happy to see you. Everyone is safe. Everyone is well. It's been such a challenging year.
Yes, it has. I'm happy to be here too, and nice to meet you. We're in this room. It's not the same room maybe we thought we'd meet in, but it's a room.
Exactly. So the story behind this series is the first was to talk about this, which we can talk about, but it's more interesting for me as I'm getting ready to record the next one. I find myself asking myself so many questions about music, about life, and a huge part of this music has always been about mentorship, and it's always been about community. And I always feel in debt to so many people around me, and it's basically my chance to roam through your brains and ask for advice about many things. Mentorship has been a huge thing for in your life. You've been mentored by almost any possible legend I can think of, and also many incredible musicians that I know were mentored by you. You've been an educator for many years, passing on the wisdom. So I think I'm gonna touch on that in a second, but the first thing would be congratulate you on the new album. I mean, here's to you. The album is, the album. I mean, to me, that whole album, but especially that track, the Waiting Game track, it's something that comes out in a really long time, and I think it achieves something that is utterly personal and at the same time is completely universal, and which is very difficult to achieve. But I think the strength of that album for me is that it sounds like now. It's music of our time, of our, and that is to me probably the most you know, any great thing that I think of. And Kind of Blue, Love Supreme, in a sound way, it's like a capsule of an era. And I feel you miraculously did that. So how, was that a conscious thing? Was it not a conscious thing? Like, what does that mean to you?
Well, thank you, first of all, for such complimentary words. And I'm so glad that the album resonated with you. Um, I think when you set out to do something, you're not exactly sure what it will be or how you'll accomplish what you think you're setting out to do. The one thing I knew is that I wanted to make a project and start a group with Aaron Parks and Matthew Stevens. And um, really because they're not only two of my favorite musicians, but two of my favorite people. And
Yeah,
I
of
realized
course.
that I just really enjoyed talking to them. And though they're both younger than me, um, I just, I felt connected to them
Were
artistically.
you
And huh?
were you in touch at all with Matthew when he was back in Berkeley? Because
No,
I known Aaron since we're like, because of a New York thing, but
yeah, no. I just heard him. I didn't know him, and I just reached out to him out of the blue because I loved his sound and the way he played. Um, and he reached right back, and we started doing some gigs together. And he quickly became, uh, it's one of my favorite people, and just what a beautiful guy. And same with Aaron, and we were playing together in two different configurations, so they were never we were never around each other at the same time until we did one gig together in China, I believe, and that's when we really started talking about it. And we just started sharing some files, sharing some music. I went to New York a couple of times and just uh, I think Matthew wasn't around, and Aaron and I just got together and played and messed around with things. And yeah, so
so a minute before this, when you were playing gigs with them separately and that gig in China, what material are we talking about?
that gig in China was based on I think it was the Money Jungle. Yeah, it was Money Jungle music from that CD, and loosely based on that. And with any CD, I think the forms of the music, are there just to be expanded upon, of course. So I think it moved in different directions than a CD, and I just used it. I think the gig too as an opportunity to get the three of us together.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then,
And it was like it was an instant chemistry thing that you felt.
yeah, I just go by vibrations and my gut instincts and those kinds of things. And I'm not. I mean, I take my lessons from my predecessors, and Art Blakey. He kept bands and people around him, people that were younger than him, right? And also, so many other people: Betty Carter, Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock. A lot of the people I worked with. And I knew that I wanted to do my next project with some people that were of a different generation than myself, and people that have a sound that I really had my eyes and heart on, moving toward. And I knew that
Yeah.
I couldn't do that by myself.
And
So
can I ask you about the writing process? I mean, the songs are just gorgeous. The harmonies, and I don't mean the changes. I mean the vocal harmonies. This is obviously very well thought out.
Yeah, it took us like about 2 years, two to 2.5 years to make the album. The first album, it's a double album. So the first album with the songs that are produced and written, it took about 2.5 years. The second, uh, the B side I call it, but it's the album two, that took 1 hour to to
Ah,
record, and then
nice.
a few hours of overdubs with woodwinds and strings that were orchestrated to what we played, orchestrated by Edmar Cologne. Um, so it's two very different sounding albums basically, and I thought that was an idea of mine, that something I always wanted to do, because
It, I,
everybody's trying to put you in boxes all the time, and I felt like doing two records that were so different and making it a double album was one way to not only show the diversity of the musicianship, but just to say we're in a new time and people can really do whatever the hell they want. We don't have to fit in these silos, and we don't have to adhere to A&R people anymore, really. So that was the idea.
so 2.5 years. Walk me through the process. Walk me through the steps, because I'm kind of in a point. We're working on the new album for Rope-a-Dope. I'm rehearsing with some guys here who are fantastic. I'm writing like mad. Half of the things I write, or actually 3/4 of the things I write, I throw away. 1/4 I bring to the guys for the weekly rehearsal. We're playing it like a just acoustically like a trio. And next thing will be electronics and then vocal harmonies. And it seems like such a daunting task. I
Uh,
mean, to go through from the one page to where I hope it will get. So walk me through
it
those two
is.
and a half years. I mean, what was it like?
Um, well, first, before we do that, is Nitsan playing drums with you still? I think his name
Nitan
right.
is in Israel right now recording a vocal album, no less. He's singing.
Oh, really? Yeah,
And
he was a former student of mine.
I know, I know, I
Yeah,
know.
that's 5 week. Yeah.
Um, but um, but we kind of got stranded, my fiance and I, in Berlin as we were planning to move back to New York in April right before COVID.
I-
So I'm playing with an amazing guy here, Tobias Backhouse, who's been playing a lot with Kurt and very other people like that. And the other guy is also a New York guy, Josh Ginsberg, uh, who's playing a lot with, recorded with Aaron on a couple of Aaron's albums.
Mhm.
And he plays in EJ Strickland's band, things like that.
Nice.
Fantastic people and fantastic players. And
Yeah.
we were supposed to go on this really long tour, and then the world changed for everyone.
Yes, 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 it did. Okay, I'll go back.
But
I inserted. I had to insert that while I thought about it. That's one thing. Getting older, sometimes I'll forget things. I knew I wanted to just ask you and check in about Nitsan.
that's so cool. But
But
I
yeah,
do have a chunk of time on my hands. So I'm writing and rehearsing, and this is where you come in. I mean, what was the process from thinking you want to do something that's new to you? And I mean, I'm assuming you're at the piano working on, I can hear that the vocal lines and I can hear that the melody lines. I can hear you like kind of going on the piano and doing the changes. How did it get from that to
well,
what I'm hearing?
yeah, most of the songs are collaborative. First of all, between either me and Aaron, or Matthew and myself, or one song is Aaron and Casa. Um, uh, but the three of us are the core writers. So we, like I had a couple of songs that I wrote by myself, um, but for the most part, the three of us are the core writers. So every song evolved differently. Um, for instance, some songs we just kind of rearranged a bit. Trapped in the American Dream was something that Aaron had already recorded, and it was called Trapped in a Dream.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds, if you listen to the two versions, they sound very different, but you can tell that, obviously it's the same composition, but by adding rap and adding kind of hook lines and the type of production that it is, um, I felt like the song had another life, to it. Um, Bells, the second track on the album, Aaron uh, sent that to me, and he had been just working on it. So he sent me just him playing Rhodes, I believe, with this little drum program in the back, and I immediately heard church bells and thought about I had recently watched the Philando Castile shooting by a police officer, and his girlfriend and her child were in the back seat, and it just kept sticking with me. Like, how did they feel? And if they had the chance to say something to the police officer, what would that be? Um, and of course, I have no idea what that would have been because I haven't experienced that. But it was my way of looking into that emotion. And
And this was at least a year before this exploded into mainstream media. I mean, I cannot even open my feed without having without finally having daily evidence of what's actually been going on for so long.
right. Yeah. I mean, that's why you have music that's talking about it, kind of throughout the years. But somehow, now it's just with cell phones being able to capture everything. Now we're just seeing it right in front of our faces a lot more. And what I'm always so surprised at is how it keeps happening when everybody now knows there's cell phones and they know
Yeah.
that people are probably watching, and it still happens. I mean, that's kind of amazing, that people feel that removed or that protected, that they feel like they can still do it and get away with
Or
it.
or just that hateful. I think it's, to me, the word thing is people are that hateful.
Yeah, but even if somebody, you have to be very stupid to be that hateful at the risk of, losing your own freedom. You know what I mean? I guess I just don't understand that kind of hate, you know?
Of course, thank God. But I think, me having I always felt at a loss, growing up, spending the entire decade of my 20s in vans with African Americans from any generation. I always felt at a loss because I never had the background being Israeli, and to feel like I can comment in an authentic way, but I always felt that I had the tools to learn, to listen, and the obligation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always speechless about what I see on the news or on on different streams. It just, the fact that we're 2020 and that is still happening is
Yeah,
a shameful mark on the human race. It's not an American phenomenon anymore.
right.
It's just that the essence of us as human beings.
Yes, I agree with you. It's definitely a shameful mark on the human race. And I think what has to happen is what's starting to happen now, and it's a global movement, to really say we're tired of this. We're not going to stand for it anymore. This cannot happen. I'm still though so shocked at how many people in our country are not on that page, that are supporting, I don't want to even say his name, our racist in chief, the people that are supporting him and that are feeling like there's nothing wrong with
Yeah.
the police departments or the system that we have right now. And that's why a lot of people that I talk to and um, my friends, Dr. Angela Davis and others, are always talking about abolition and transformation and radical things, because these things don't tend to change without that kind of radical movement. And I'm just,
First of all, can I be friends with Dr. Davis too?
maybe.
I have to ask you though, the album
Because
is,
the reason why also I mention that is because it takes a long time to come to certain things. I think this album is a kind of a cumulative experience of just my growth and just the things, that I've been dealing with over the course of, a 35, 40-year career. And so somebody like Dr. Davis has also been a mentor to me. So our mentors aren't just the musicians, that
of course,
you know what I mean. And so that's
of course.
important, for me to mention because I've had mentors in various areas. But yeah, you were saying.
So I want to ask you, the album is essentially optimistic to me. I mean, it has such strength, such spirit to it. And I think talking about these kind of subjects with this much optimism and this much spirit speaks volumes.
Mm.
I mean, about who you are.
Oh, thanks. Well, I'm a optimistic person for sure. I'm a happy person. I love people. I love humanity. I love everybody until, at first, until, they show me something not to love. Um, I'm also angry at all the things that have happened in this country. I'm angry that it's taking so long to rectify some of this. I wake up every morning, Black and female, and I have to look at the world, through an intersectional lens. And I think that's what this album did. I think it, we all, like, my thing was I wasn't thinking about, well, I started a band with two white guys, and now we're going to be talking about a lot of, criticizing, a lot of these issues that's happening in the country. And I just felt united with them. So I felt like when this, now with the movement, Black Lives Matter movement, and after George Floyd, I'm seeing that kind of unity um, that I felt like I was feeling, like right on the cusp of something. I think, just energetically, I think I must have felt where we were going,
Yeah,
which was great,
that's unbelievable to me.
Yeah,
But
it
that's
was
unbelievable to
on
me.
the
But
verge of something.
I will say that if one ever wants to learn about gut and intuition, that jazz will be the way to go. And I would also say that I always felt that the jazz community is it's such a tight knit community, and color hasn't been an issue for many years with that color. I mean, I always felt completely accepted. I was raised by Jim Hall on one hand and then Reggie Workman on the other hand,
Mhm.
and it never seemed an issue, especially with the older generation. I mean, it was never an issue. It was never spoken about. It was never, and I always felt that the jazz community, if we could share more of that to the world, and let people know that it hasn't been an issue for, I mean, decades.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's two ways of looking at that, and I understand your point of view. I feel like jazz has been the most inclusive art form that anyone could imagine. Everybody is welcome to it. Everybody's welcome to play it. Everybody's welcome to appreciate it. Um, I think that jazz musicians, African American jazz musicians, have still suffered um, from systemic oppression uh, and systemic racism and sexism and misogyny. The music has suffered from sexism and misogyny the most, more than the people. But that's another. We can get into that. But I feel like we have to still look at how the music has, you know, grown and developed, and I think African Americans have been not involved in the entire process. And I think we are looking at now, when we look through the lens of what's happening in society right now, people are demanding not just a seat at the table, but to be head of the table. That's leadership roles. So when we look back at how the music developed, financially, from a business perspective, uh, there's no way that systemic racism can't affect that, or doesn't, or didn't affect that, because one,
Agreed.
you know,
Agreed.
yeah. So though people are inclusive to everybody playing it, the first thing about that is making sure, which especially what we're supposed to do in jazz education, but making sure people really understand um, how the music came to be, the culture and the history of the music, which is also, intertwined with African American culture. And sometimes you get further and further away from that. So all of the people that are not African American that play it, that I play with, that I vibe with, that I'm friends with, they understand that. You know what I mean? There's
Right.
no question. But there are younger people, and what's happening with through jazz education, not making that a requirement to really teach the history of the music, and understand the culture of which it came, not making that a requirement in jazz education, I think has really gotten people further and further away from how and why the music was created in the first place. And I teach, of course, at Berkeley College, but I have this 5-week program, and um, every year it's more and more difficult. Well, I'm doing better because you just have to work harder. But to have young women in the program and to have African Americans in the program, because of this merit system that's been developed by the so-called experts, the people
Uh-huh.
that say what the music's supposed to be, and you have to play like this, you have to have this kind of technique, you have to play over these chord changes, and this is and it's based on uh comparison, and articulating it and writing it down based on these kind of European classical standards,
Yeah.
and taking
Yeah.
away the importance
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
rhythm and the blues. So
Yeah.
I have people that can play, all these, modern chord changes, and super technique. But then if you just go play a blues, it doesn't sound good. Or if
Uh,
you play something, that's just a medium or slow swing, it doesn't sound good.
exactly. Let's call this, and
And
let's
not
see
that
who
even,
stays in the room.
yeah, and even if it's not swinging, it's just a matter of, I mean, swing is a little bit relative to me. It's not a one kind of thing. All music has swing. When I say that, I mean a rhythmic flow, a connection to time that makes your body want to move, that makes you want to dance, and that's kind of what swing evokes immediately, right? When it's done right. But, if you take that concept and move it into, whatever, straight eighth, odd time signatures, whatever it is, you still want to feel that same thing. And that has
Yeah.
to swing in its own way too.
Yeah.
So,
So I want to ask you about this, but before I do, uh, this is probably my only chance ever, because I would never get into this politically, to say how I'm the last fan of jazz education ever. I think that it creates a system where the people that would the people that would learn about this music are the people that can afford to,
exactly.
and I think it creates this middle class white American student, where I'm assuming that's the majority because their parents can afford to, and I think that it and I think the whole idea of learning um, from books, an oral phenomenon, it's absurd. That's an understatement. And everyone that I listen to I mean, they were good readers, but they didn't learn this way. I mean, this is something that very few people say in jazz education is the people that you idolize, their process was so vastly different. I mean, and I respect a lot of the people that set the system in place. But
Well, I don't know how much I respect them. I mean, only because I think it also proves, you know, it commodified, you know, learning the music
yeah,
and
exactly. I
so
mean,
it
what I
makes
mean is,
people
I really love Mick Goodrick and Gary Burton and people that codified the scale of changes, blah blah blah. But I mean, I wish that I would learn much younger that it's not about that, and that Coleman Hawkins didn't play Body and Soul, make it a #1 hit without even playing the melody. And I think my music is different, it's going in a different way. But if you cannot play rhythm changes and blues, and you don't have that knowledge, and if your music doesn't sound like the blues, no matter what it sounds like, I don't want to play with you.
right.
If we cannot talk about Hank Mobley until the end of the day, if you don't understand that Billy Higgins he only played quarter notes, and you heard 6/8 and 4/4 at the same time,
Right.
and we don't belong on the same bandstand.
See,
And
I
I
knew I
will
liked you.
say, especially since Stanley Crouch has passed, uh, I think that movement was essential to my generation because it forced us to learn the merits and the essence and the pillars. And I mean, uh, it became less about people posing in blah 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 with leather instruments with haircuts, and it taught us the essence of, you know, Sweets Addison or Booker Irvin or a lot of unsung heroes. And so yeah, I think that's kind of priceless, and it's actually, I think it's very well needed nowadays. Without dropping any names, I go to schools, and I'm thinking that if this is the way you're going to learn, you're not going to evolve to the best of your potential.
Right.
But that's my tirade about that. I'm sorry.
No, I know you're absolutely right. But the one thing I'm just going to add to that, because I went so long, you know, thinking about the music a certain way, and all of these traditions, and those traditions are important. Uh, you can't escape. I tell, you know, my students all the time, you can't escape learning the blues, learning bebop. You can't escape it. I can always hear when somebody didn't study any bebop. I can hear it immediately. So one of the beauties about jazz is it being a continuum of these traditions. But on the other hand, I have to say, because it's a big part of you know, my purpose in life from now on, there are also traditions that we can be critical of. So when we sit here and we talk about the history of the music, and we romanticize it because it's what we love and it's what our life is based on, and mine, you know, too. uh, I can't do it anymore without being conscious that we don't list any women's names because they weren't there, really, you know. And it puts me in another thing that I, you know, learned uh, from, you know, listening to Dr. Davis, is we have to start thinking more about the future, and transforming the present into a different future, so that we're not regurgitating, you know, the same histories. And even
I
as
completely
beautiful
agree.
as they are, jazz dropped the ball when it came to gender. And it's a time now, with all of the awareness going on, especially around race. It's time now for, you know, all these many institutions, music institutions and other institutions, to really look at gender and sexism and misogyny at the same time that they're looking at race. And so
Yeah.
for me to drive down the street and have the radio on and not hear any women represented for like a whole, I don't know, hour trip, 2 hour trip, whatever it is, um, that's not cool. It's not cool anymore. It just, we have to do better. I mean, we have to create situations where more women can be mentored, because without being mentored, what happened is many women just immediately had to start their own bands, or, be leaders before they were ready, or just play together because they, couldn't get in these other bands or be mentored by people, and that sees their development. And so the mentoring
I
part
want
is,
to hear more about this because I have a naive reality of playing gigs with Lakeisha Benjamin and Kim Thompson, and just too many Annette Cohen, too many incredible musicians, Luciana Souza, from any part in the world, um, any color, any nationality, that if you didn't come prepared, you would sound like shit next to them. I mean, and we're talking about them when they were like 20.
mm,
Uh,
well, yeah, but you're talking about
so I want to hear more.
you're talking about exceptions, and that's the problem. I mean, you were in an environment where you were around, you were in a progressive environment. You were around, these young women that were starting to make names for themselves. But you have to realize that these are exceptions, because no matter where you look, whether it's on the cover of magazines, on record covers, in schools, in bands, big bands, in groups, just any group you go to see, no matter where you look, is going to be around 5% of women that have kind of, made it, so to say, that are deemed worthy of being on the cover of a magazine, or just being, I don't want to say compared to me, but just in, you know, if I were to look at peers, it would be definitely around 5%. And that's not good enough, not when women are 50%, of the world. So this is not, to express
Agreed.
yourself in this music, you don't have to, there's nothing inherently male about it, and we have to look at the breakdown in the system of how this has happened, and try to correct it. That's all we can do. But everybody has to do it. And that's the problem. That's why what we're seeing now with race in America is finally, turning the corner, because everybody is looking at it and saying, wow, what can I do? I don't want to be a racist. I don't even want to be a non-racist. I want to be an anti-racist. That's what people are saying now. And all I'm saying is I want jazz to do the same thing when it comes to gender. I want to just do the same thing. And then that's how the corner will turn, and there'll be, because see, really the music won't reach its full potential. We won't know how the music could sound if there were
Yeah,
gender equity. We don't know. And
I
everybody
could,
has just been satisfied with it the way that it is. Everybody's been
I
like, this music is
cannot,
so great. So what? It's created by all men, and that's mostly who plays it. It's so great, we don't care. And that is
I
not good enough.
cannot agree more. And also let young women know that they don't have to be vocalists. If you want to be
Well, that's what I'm talking
bass
about.
player, or if you want to be a drummer, you want to be a trumpet player, go for it. I mean,
Well, yeah, but that's easier said than done, because they're discouraged from the beginning, the band directors, and
exactly,
it's not,
exactly.
it's not ladylike, or whatever these, social constructs have decided. Um, you know, it's not as easy as you're saying, actually. I wish it were, but even just down to language, and people are still calling people chicks, and people are still like talking in a way that just seems uh whatever the opposite of progressive is, digressive, I don't know. But
Yeah,
you know
and not empowering.
yeah, it's not cool. But it's changing. I see it. I see it changing, and I just need all of my brothers to make sure they're involved with the change, and not saying it's, see, because that's what I said. When people are saying it's not good enough to be non-racist anymore, you have to be anti-racist. It's the same thing with this. it's not good enough to say, oh, I'll hire a woman if she can play. I'm not a sexist. I'll hire a woman if she can play. And then none of them come around. So then you don't hire any. So that is not, being
Yeah.
anti-sexist, right? You have to
Yeah.
do some work too. Because
Yeah.
what's happened is all of the work, just like race in America, the work is put on the very group of people that have suffered the oppression. And
Yeah.
that's kind of, not cool. I'm so tired of it.
I also want to tell you that that is absolute bullshit because I was hired by Legends way before I could play. I sound like shit. She will never play. It's not I hire a girl if she can play. She won't play unless you hire her. You know what I mean? You need the stage. You need the gigs. You need to be able to deliver on tour. You need the rehearsals and the sessions to grow. I mean,
Yeah.
I couldn't play when I was hired. I was just learning. I still can play. I'm still learning, hopefully.
Yeah, we're all still learning. That's the beautiful thing about the music too. It, there's no cap. You can always
Yeah.
just keep going, and it's such an empowering um, place to be free. To express yourself, to bring your authentic self to the table, and that's also the reason, why I do this kind of work now, because I think it's just a travesty if young women have a dream like I did, and never get to realize it, because it's such an amazing place to be able to like create,
Yeah.
like this. And everybody, and the other thing about that is when I look at some of the women that are successful, whether instrumentalists or vocalists, but especially instrumentalists, often the personality type is the one that just cuts through all the bullshit. It's the one that will like be like a Mack truck. It's the one that will stand next to any man and be like, yeah, come on, let's go. And so I've noticed that that strong woman personality it's easier for them to kind of deal with all the bullshit. Um, but you shouldn't have to be that personality type
I
to have the
I totally
opportunity.
agree. I totally agree. I totally agree. I mean, I totally agree. I couldn't agree more. Uh, I always, yeah, I totally agree. So I do feel that waiting game achieves all that and more for me as a listener, as a fan and a lover of music. Um,
Thanks.
and I think it's a huge milestone. And I'm so happy to see that so many people are responding to it. It's very tangible for me to see that people are, because it strengthened my belief that when greatness arrives, people get it.
Mm. Thank you so much.
Um,
I appreciate you saying that, because I was actually very surprised myself that it's being accepted even by jazz critics, for it to kind of win, these awards it's won. I never ever expected that, because I just felt like the jazz police weren't weren't going to embrace this record at all. But, you know, they have, pretty people that I might feel were conservative listeners, and the people that have
I
been
think
gatekeepers.
that I think that's coming back to jazz education, that we were never explicitly told that while it's our responsibility to learn our craft, it's also our responsibility to reinvent it. And that is something that I think you've done, in spades.
Yeah,
So I'm going back to the craft.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the craft is important because it's all important for me. You know what I mean? I'm never on too much of a bandwagon on one thing, because it's this kind of balance in life that makes us who we are. And the primary thing is your relationship to your instrument, because if you can't get that together, then these other things won't even matter, right? It's kind of almost like I think trying to constantly kind of look at the root source of things, and just a quick analogy, and I'll come back to your thing about craft. But like if you look at environmental justice and how many people maybe aren't as concerned about that as these other justice
Yeah.
issues, it doesn't make any sense, right? Because it's the primary one, it's the mother of all justice. Because without a planet, we wouldn't be able to even talk about racial justice or gender
Yeah,
justice
and
and the other thing.
also, you know what I mean? Hopefully, people would live long enough, or your children you're inheriting this to your children. And if you were bought on the lie that climate change is a lie, just look at this past week. I mean, doesn't make a genius.
Exactly. So I'm just saying that all of these things create, because Wayne Shorter says, I'm not what I do what I am. And Herbie and Wayne both, talk about playing life and not music. So that's kind of where I come from. The more I've developed myself as a person and as a thinker, the more my music gets honed into something that feels more authentic and real to me. But the primary thing would have to be me, my hands, my craft. I have to be able to play. I have to, so that I can then be artistic with it. So because often, you get a new student and you start talking about music and all of the things that they're talking about. I'm like, wow, yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, this is beautiful. Yeah. And then they go to play and I'm like, oh, okay, we have to go back, to rudiments. We have to start at the beginning, because all of these great ideas and great things aren't going to mean anything if you don't have your craft together.
So I want to talk about your craft for a second. Before I do, I will say this, because we're obviously going to go past the deadline this time because you're just so fucking intriguing and interesting. Excuse my language. So I will say this. I think that Winning is a masterpiece. We're lucky that Mutema is giving it away. So anyone who's watching right now and sharing the episode to their stream, so more people can know about the amazing Teri Carrington. We're just gonna pick one of you guys at the end and note it and send it your way. It's difficult for me to speak about your career because you just said 35 to 40 years, which probably started when you were 2. We're talking about decades of landmarks. It's so difficult to talk about your playing or your and I also think that it's very difficult to talk about your playing at all because I'm quoting the producer behind the Wayne and Herbie albums, who said that your input and your personality and your vision has been so vital to the process. So I'm just gonna
Bob, thank you,
throw.
Bob. I haven't talked to
I'm
him in
just
a
gonna
long time.
throw. I'm just gonna bring out some albums, and then I'm gonna ask you about a couple of your specific albums because they were life changing for me. But these are specific albums in a sea of masterpieces that you are on. I mean, there's just so much we're not gonna cover today, sadly, because time is what it is. We're talking about working with Schofield on one hand, working with there's just so much of it. So the first, I'm just going to throw out things. I chose this kind of instinctively. I'm assuming that you grew up listening to this. It's Herbie Hancock, Maiden Voyage.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't grow up like just zoning in on that, but I mean, I grew up learning songs more than what was happening kind of in the performances. I felt those things. They felt, like things that I could cuddle up to, or things that inspire me to play a certain way. But like that particular album, I think it was just more about loving songs and learning the songs. So I'm not even sure at this point like who's playing on that album. I'm not like a audiophile person to that degree. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure you could pick some that I completely, know exactly and remember exactly what was happening. But we'll see.
We're talking macro. You were, for me, the first person to come out with their own sound after Tony, Alvin, and Jack. I mean, that was like trifecta and Roy to
Right.
come out of and try to both learn it and embody it, but also what's next. I mean, and I'm not talking about just about the M-bass years. I'm talking about also
You really
just
studied, you know. You bringing up stuff I don't, you know, people don't ever ask me about.
excuse my language, but you are a legend. I mean, it's kind of impossible to be a legend when you're 30 years before legend age, but we're just talking about discography. So
Okay.
we're talking about all those albums, 80s and 90s, countless of them. It could be Simon Wilson or Greg Osby, but it could also be things with Adam Rogers. It's a cool thing, or it could be with Danilo. There's just so much of it, and it all has your sound. But I always thought that Tony was the youth thing for you, but you never sounded anywhere like it. I mean, you always had your own thing.
Well,
How
I
do
specifically
I come up with that? How can I? That's the question.
Well, I specifically tried to make sure that I didn't sound like Tony, even though I loved the way he played, because there were two drummers that I felt like if you try to sound like them, it could be a problem, and that would be Tony and Elvin Jones. So I really tried as much as I can hear sometimes, you know, Elvin's, you know, like influence coming in to play, especially on some of the earlier recordings I'm on maybe, but uh, I just never wanted to sound like a caricature of Elvin Jones, you know. And you know, at 18 is when I started getting you know, close to Jack DeJohnette, and he even said that his two biggest influences were Roy Haynes and Elvin Jones. So Jack kind of became immediately my biggest influence, but I also knew I didn't want to sound like him, though I think I started to in some ways, you know, but I think, you know, I had just enough of a sound of my own that just didn't quite, you know, do it, which was great, right? And also the tuning of drums and those things. I always tuned a bit lower than a lot of jazz drummers, I think.
Yeah.
But and that's because
My dad actually, my dad actually once told me about your playing. We went to see you with Herbie on that tour, and we also listened to the album a lot at home. And he always said that he loved the way you tune the drums.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. I spend a lot of time with tuning them because I get distracted if they don't sound the way I'm hearing them in my head. Um, like the overtones in the drums, like in each venue is going to bring out a different, you know, overtone. And so the drums, the same drum kit, even we don't even play the same drum kits anymore touring, but even if I were playing the same drum kit, it's going to sound different each place. And so sometimes those rings and overtones, they just started distracting me from the playing. So I always take the time to really tune and use a little tape if I need to or whatever. But I needed to always feel at home with the instrument so that I wasn't fighting it in any way or being distracted by noises. Um, but anyway, I just feel like, you know, what you're saying about Tony, also being from Boston, of course, you know, coming out of the tradition of Roy Haynes, Alan Dawson, and Tony Williams.
Did you study with Alan? I think you have,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Sure. He was like, you know, my, you know, teaching guru. He, you know, and also I had to try to not make sure I didn't sound like him because I saw him play a lot because I lived there and his brother lived across the street from my parents and from us. Um, Alan lived in the neighborhood, you know, it was more like family, you know. And he didn't even take me as a student until he felt like I was old enough because he didn't
Oh,
want it to discourage me, like his discipline. But yeah, so I had, you know, things just lined up for me cosmically, karmically, however you want to look at it. Things just lined up in a way that I was very, very fortunate, blessed, whatever, you know, words people, you know, use, but lucky, all of those things. But, you know, I think I also have a strong work ethic. and a strong ability to take in things. My brain, I can't even remember the word I'm looking for, but just to take in things, and I don't have to experience everything myself to understand it or learn it, and I don't have to transcribe to kind of get the essence maybe of what I'm going for. So I also consciously didn't transcribe a lot of these great drummers because I didn't want to start playing licks, you
Yeah.
know, like them.
Yeah.
I wanted to just feel their essence and see what I could work with that and their time feel or choices that they make in orchestration or the things that I would pay attention to, weren't licks.
So excuse my super specific question. If you're not transcribing, how do you get to that, to develop that the time feel, which I don't think people understand. It's the most crucial thing. I mean, you listen to a Wes Montgomery album, it doesn't matter the notes. I mean, it just feels good.
Yeah.
How do you develop that if you're not transcribing?
Well, when I think of transcribing, I think of transcribing the licks, the notes, the rhythms, but not necessarily the feel, because many people transcribe and they don't capture the feel, right? So you're talking about a feel thing, but also phrasing is important. So, like you said, it's not always about the notes, but you might hear a phrase and it's part of the language. So you learn those things just like we learn to talk. We can talk without writing it down. You don't
Yeah.
have to learn to read or write to talk in no language. So I think it's kind of like that transcribing thing. When people learn things by ear, you hear it and then you play it. And that's what I did. If I wanted to repeat something that I heard, I had to make sure I was listening critically enough to be able to hear it and then try to play it. So I never, wrote it down, and I never, even if I heard it and wanted to play it, like, what is that? Doing it my way, I would have a different sticking, or maybe orchestrate it different. Just take the essence of the thing, and that's the part that spoke to my heart, and then play it my way.
So speaking about playing it your way, you grew up listening to all those albums, and then you're in the studio or on tour with Herbie. What was that experience, especially that album? Because it was a life-changing album for me. But
Mm-hmm.
what? Let's say, what is it like to be in that room? What was the process like? What was? I mean, I heard so many stories about those sessions. So
You're talking about Gresham's World?
yeah, like Herbie singing for 9 hours at a piano, or 3 days on like three changes, or you expect that guy to just come in and just go like this and go home.
I have seen him sit and go through a very, very slow process of learning a song, a standard. It could be just a standard he didn't know, and just play the chord. So you playing it so slow that you don't even hear the song anymore because it's so slow. But somehow when he does that, he really hears the whole orchestration of that chord and the relationship between the chord before and the next chord, and then he can just breeze through it and play it, and he has it memorized, and it's just amazing kind of process. I've never seen anybody do that before. It's that thing that where you just keep going until you get there. You're not going to stop. It's like a dog with a bone. You're not going to stop. You have to get that bone. You have to tear it up. You have to, chew it until it's gone.
Giovanni always tells me that he works on something so slow that the clouds are moving too fast for him. It's like,
that's so beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think
So I'm going to the
answer to
next
your
thing that.
okay.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I think it's also not about just being in the sessions, but being on the road and doing some videos and just observing somebody like Herbie and Wayne, and observing how they lead bands, observing the things that are important to them, and it's not often the things that are important to other people that I've worked with and played with. So I think I kind of took a page, out of their
Put it
book.
in context for me. What does it mean to you? The things that they lead with.
Well, not necessarily, looking at how somebody plays a solo on a certain song, like how they choose their band. So as an example, um, there's certain qualities in playing that, say, Wayne Shorter will look for, and he relates it to the person and to their life. So he'll say something like, "Oh, that person has good follow through," and that's important to him. So follow through just means what? It could mean a couple of things, but one thing would mean like the ideas follow through to the end. They keep going. They don't get cut short. They don't get diverted. There's a follow through with thought. It's not maybe scattered or, and so you hear this complete idea. He might say that this person needs to get married or something like that, and maybe that's saying, that there's a certain commitment that has to be there that he was not feeling or hearing.
I was also always getting a sense that Wayne really knew how to empower the people around him. Like Rachel Z always told me that the process on High Life, what you guys did together, was it like a year just in the studio or something like that, or a year in a rehearsal room
Yeah,
working
she
on.
worked. Yeah, she worked with him on that stuff earlier and putting it and really getting it clear, getting helping to get clarity with the pieces. I'm only on one song on that record. I had played on a couple more, but Marcus produced that record. I ended up on just one song, so I forget that I'm on High Life, actually.
Ah,
It was beautiful. I did finally play that song live with Wayne at the Detroit Jazz Festival. Esperanza and Wayne and Leah and I played when one concert when Wayne was doing a 3-day residency for Detroit Jazz Festival a couple of years back. But anyway, yeah, it's more about letting people, like, being the kind of leader that does what you're saying, like gives people, empowers other people, and lets people bring their ideas to the table. I was always, I guess, like the producer in me was always the one saying, well, what about this kind of set list? And what if we put this song here? This will go nice here. Can we do this one just a little faster? I was always coming up with suggestions, but figuring out a way to hopefully do it where it wasn't offensive or stepping on anybody's toes, and just because it's coming from a place, from my heart, in a place that's really trying to serve the music and the leader, and not serve myself. So I think that's obvious, when that happens. And I also have to be in tune with people and their backgrounds and where they came from. So like with Wayne, often we'd be up on the bus just singing these old songs and standards and he'd be talking about things from his childhood. But because I really understood the history, I got it and could go right there with him, maybe more than other people in the band. So all those kind of
yeah.
things help to create and craft uh, shows and performances and sets and solos and all, the whole thing.
So I'm going. I'll go back to Wayne in a second, but I'm just throwing some other things your way. Uh, Billie Holiday, Body and Soul. I was almost gonna bring out Lady in Satin, but I always felt something in the spirit of her singing and you're playing, and I always felt, especially that you work incredibly well with vocalists. I mean, you had a way of putting the song first, but also, and I heard that, and I'm not going to mention any names, but there was a vocalist in Carnegie Hall, and you stepped in for one song, and you changed the room, and that's a story that us musicians carry around us.
I
And
don't even know
especially
what you're
your
talking
album.
about.
Let's
You have to
not
tell me
mention any
yeah,
names, but
tell me later.
but but you and of course you released an album with every possible vocal legend that ever lived. So let's talk about what does that mean to you? Just the song itself.
Yeah, to me, it's always been more about the music than the drums, first of all. The drums really don't mean a hell of a lot to me, other than I do like rhythm. I like groove and I like rhythm. And it's just my voice, for whatever reason, comes through that way. But I like to sing and I like to write. So songs with lyrics are important to me. It's a part of my own expression. It just wasn't one that maybe people knew about as much, over the course of my career. And maybe it wasn't one that I did as much, or, maybe I didn't kind of excel necessarily at it as much as I did at the drums, but it was just as important to me. So I felt like I expressed myself in these ways as a drummer, as a writer, music writer, but also as a lyricist and as a singer sometimes, and as a producer. So those are the things that make me feel good about uh, music, what I'm doing in music. So it was natural to want to work with singers. And I felt like a lot of my friends were singers, and how some of my best musical experiences were figuring out how to play for them and still be myself and do what they need, because sometimes singers need something very different, right, than instrumentalists. And you
Yeah,
have to,
yeah.
yeah,
I
you have to
always felt that you had that. People always know you as this burning, mad wave of drumming. But if we talk about the work with Cassandra Wilson, with Dan Reeves, there's so many people that you just bring so much. I don't even know. It's a mixture of beauty and panache that is crucial to the song, and the song is first. And I think your album is the first to embody that. I mean, a drummer's album that is about songs with vocalists. I mean, that just speaks volumes.
Yeah, thank you. And I like to arrange. So a lot of that on that first Mosaic project, yeah, well, I took some contemporary songs and arranged them, some old songs. I took some old songs and made them kind of more modern, and I took some uh, modern songs and made them more jazz. So I just like to hear, like, if I hear a melody in my head and a lyric and it keeps staying there, then I know it's something that speaks to me and it's something I want to jump into. So what I do is I just keep hearing this melody and the lyric, and eventually all the chords that were played or written for this melody, they dissipate in my mind, and it just becomes like the melody and the
Ah,
lyric. So then I start adding my own chords. You know what I mean?
that
So,
makes sense to me. I mean, your writing has this anthem quality to it.
oh, thank
So
you.
I'm jumping before you blush again. I'm jumping to the next one. Jack DeJohnette with his group. I could choose anyone, but if we had to capsule what you learned from Jack, I mean, what are we talking about? What is it
Woo.
like? Because he didn't choose a lot of people. He didn't mentor a lot of people. And you know what I mean? It's not. It's like you and Garrison. That's pretty much it. Right?
Yeah, he's like the second father, to me in many respects. Um, we didn't like sit down to the drum set really too much. I there were maybe a few things he just said to me, but most of the time it was just about music. And oh, he's the same way, right? He thinks about the music first and not necessarily the drums. So I think we connected on that level. But the thing that I remember the most from back when I was 18, um, 19, is him turning me on, him and his wife, Lydia, them turning me on to other musics, because I was that time period, I was really just a jazz head. So and a certain kind, like I'm trying to get my playing together, you know what I mean? So like I went to he took me to a solo Kenny Burrell solo guitar concert, which might not have been a concert that I would have went to before. He took me to a Keith Jarrett chamber music concert with string quartet, which might not have been a concert I would have went to at that time. Took me to see Sweet Honey in the Rock, who I had never heard of, and then I just, my mind was blown. I would probably would not have gone to see an a cappella vocal group then. He took me to a Burning Spirit concert. So I think they said we have to open you up. You have to start thinking more openly about music, and that was really, really important to my development. As far as Jack is very organic player, and so I learned the importance of listening and responding and shaping things. And like we were playing, I remember once early on, maybe the first time we played together, and he was playing piano at his house and I'm playing drums, and he played something and I kind of like played something, and then he said afterward, you don't have to let me know that you heard what I did. You don't have to answer me, like, and I was like, oh, like light bulb. So it's little things, just like that, but it's more about how you think about music opposed to real specific things.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I think everybody knows Jack for Miles and for Keith, but he released at least two that I know, solo piano albums, and the work with John Sherman. Like duets where they're playing everything, and it's so vast.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go to this one in a second, and also this one. So yeah, this John Coltrane, my favorite things. Like when you said that you were listening, you were afraid of copying Elvin. I never thought that was an issue, but I always felt that there's a connection with John's playing. There's something that's either a chant-like, or I always felt that vibe from you, from your playing. I mean, what was the impact? What was the connection? What does it feel like to you?
Yeah, I think it was a spiritual connection. Like he's the first person that made me think about music on a spiritual level, and I'm still trying to unpack that because I'm not always sure why or what that is, and that's the mysticism of spirituality and music. And music allows us to feel things, right? And things that we don't know what they are yet. We don't know how to put it into words. So that's how I felt about him, probably more than anybody else. I just felt something so deep, in my core that I wanted to experience that same thing. I wanted to hear that and feel that in my head and in my heart while I'm playing, even if it's not that song or it has anything to do with his repertoire or his style. But something about what he projected just spoke to me on a really deep level and made me want to, I can't say do the same thing, but want to feel the same thing.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. So I'm really coming to the last one or maybe two questions, because I would just go all night. And so this we talked about. I want to talk about Wayne's Allegoria for a second, even though this album changed my life in so many ways. I had a friend at the new school that worked for Verve in God knows which department, and she got me one of the advanced copies. Mm-hmm. And I ran into Bob on the street, and this was after at least 6 months of leaving each other messages. I'm trying to get in touch with him. He heard me at a gig. He said, I'm this and that. I'm like, of course I know who you are, because I read the Herbie Gershwin liner notes on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. And he said, get in touch. And every time I tried to get in touch, it was just too busy.
With Bob?
So, yeah. Okay. So I ran it in the street, and I just heard the album. It hasn't been out. And this album changed my life, because I think for all of my entire generation, it's a landmark album. But it also really solidified the relationship with Bob. And just, I have no idea what it was like, but I do know that you got Danilo in touch with Wayne somehow. I mean, you're the connection.
Yeah.
This was after Panama, right?
Oh, yeah.
And after many years of probably playing with Danilo in Boston, or.
Yeah. I mean, we played, yeah, sometimes we didn't play so much in Boston, but like, yeah, Danilo's always been like a brother, to me. We're the exact same age, and I'm actually a month or so older than him. I don't know, a few months older, but yeah, I remember we were at an event, like maybe a Monk Institute event or something, and that's when I started talking to Wayne about Danilo. Yeah, um, I just felt like it would be a good hookup, and we had
That
recorded.
worked. If history teaches us something, so what were the sessions like? I mean, this album is like a life-changing album for me, and most people don't realize that it came before all the quartet albums.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, it was it was life changing for me too. And so only because I I helped, I also we had done some gigs with John, and I we went to Japan with John, and I was, I told Wayne I felt like, John would be the perfect bass player for these gigs. We were going to Japan, so we did, and it was great. And John brought his acoustic bass, and I remember when we went to do the gigs, like Wayne hadn't been playing with acoustic bass, and so when I was talking to John before the gigs, I was really kind of assuming he was just going to bring his electric, but he brought his acoustic too. I was like, oh, and that was the first kind of taste of kind of going back a little bit to that sound while we were in Japan. Then we came back and went to cut the record. So it was, myself
When
and
you're in Japan, it's you, Danilo, and John.
Danilo wasn't there yet. No,
And which tunes are you guys playing?
I think it was Mitch Foreman playing keyboards with us then.
Ah,
Um, I don't remember, like, Beauty and the Beast and Footprints, and then some of the newer stuff uh, from the records. Maybe Three Marias for sure. Um, anyway, uh, and yeah, then Bob came along, and that's where I met Bob. Um,
he says you are essential to the whole process,
but
and
that's because I'm
he's
always
not.
saying, let's do this, let's do this. We should try this. And I have a way of communicating, with these people, because I had long relationships, and, Wayne and Herbie, and, I loved them. And somehow I could communicate in a way that they listened to me, or, heard me, or they respected me. I think that's, the biggest thing, um, that they respected my ideas. And those with them being able to respect my ideas, that makes me feel confident and valuable in the world. You know what I mean? So I know that I have good ideas because it resonated with these great musicians. That goes back to what we were talking about before, and how those kinds of experiences are essential to people, women especially, because they don't have the experiences. But so how I have all kinds of confidence. Even if I didn't have the confidence when I first started playing with Wayne at 21, I was very, self-loathing. But then when somebody like that shows you respect, then you're like, wow, I can do this. So being in those sessions, um, yeah, I could hear like direction. So we started getting Alex Acuna was playing percussion, and oh man, he's so great. And so we started getting into these grooves, and I wanted to play the rims of the drums, and lightly. I wasn't trying to. I felt like the music needed to be heard without a lot of drums cluttering it. So I was trying to find grooves and things with the percussion in a blocked way where you don't really hear the difference. That was my goal. Like, you don't hear percussion and drums, like a drum groove and then some percussion on
You
top.
also do that on Gershwin's World, big time.
Oh, thank you. So yeah, it's just like trying to find a vibe, always looking for the right vibe of something, and what feels like it might contribute in just a little magical way, to make the music feel most alive. And so I think that's all that Bob might be talking about. But um, then what happened was we did kind of like half the record, and um, I went out. Herbie had a tour, And so I had been kind of playing a little bit with Wayne and Herbie at the same time. And I used to always say, yeah, I've been playing with Wayne and playing with Herbie, and Wayne's going to the studio, and I said I just never want that day to come where I have to choose
Yeah.
between playing with Wayne or Herbie. And that day came for the second half of Alegria, because Herbie had a tour of, I don't know, maybe 3 weeks or something, in Europe, and Wayne had to finish the record, and it had been put off. And I think at one point, Bob might know this better than me, but I think they asked me about doing some dates and I couldn't. And then when they came back with, new dates, and then it was like Herbie's tour, I had to make a decision. So, but who knows? Maybe if I had stayed and done that, because what happened was Bob actually, I believe, brought Brian in at that point when I couldn't do it. So you just never know what would happen.
I'm assuming you also brought Red in because he's a huge fan of Reds, but
Yeah.
but I also always felt that to get to hear you guys in that setting is immense. It's beautiful. I mean, it's just huge. I mean, to play what would have happened, yeah, it's a dangerous game for anyone in any situation. But listen, I could go all night, but without even getting into Jerry Allen and David Murray and Marcus Miller and Greg Osby, or my favorite musician Adam Rogers, or there's just too much of it.
Well, we'll have to
Before
continue.
I'm going to send this back to Louis, because I'm sure you have a crazy semester just opened. Your impact on my life has just been immense, and it's so great to finally. Like I always told Bob, I cannot call her out of the blue and get on a session because we're not the kind of people to do a record with someone we never had history with, and B, she's just I'm not gonna do that. It seems disrespectful.
Well, if you had called me, I would have shown up. So, we come, through with Bob's recommendation too, and so in the future, if you ever want to call, please do.
That means a lot. That means a lot. But thanks so much for coming, and it's always means more when someone has a vast history of music behind them that changed your life, but the last one is the greatest one. So if you guys haven't checked that out yet, run to your streaming services, get it on vinyl. We're giving one away. Teri, I'll be in touch, and I hope to see you in person when all this is behind us.
Yes.
And stay safe, stay well, stay cool. Sound like there's no tomorrow. And we're going to send this back to Louis. And this has been my favorite one yet. Don't tell anyone.
You just told the world. I can't say enough. Thank you both, Teri Lynn especially. I learned so much in this session, not just about music, but about life, and also very specifically about my role here at Rope-a-Dope and how to approach women in the process. And I heard you loud and clear on the responsibility to try to do our part to advance, move the bar forward, and in any way we can. So I've got all kinds of ideas cooking in my head about 2021, and so
that means a lot to me. Thank you for hearing that.
So for everyone watching, I want to thank you for tuning in. I want to thank Jazz Times for presenting this. Dekel Bor, you always bring out such fascinating things. Thank you. I want to tell the public that you can go to Bandcamp. Motema Music is where to look for Teri Lynn Carrington, Social Science album. Dekelbor.bandcamp.com is where you can find Dekel's record, and you can find others at ropeadope.bandcamp.com. Also want to point out to people that to look up, if you found this conversation interesting, and I don't see how you couldn't, take a look at the Berkeley Jazz and Gender Justice Program that Teri Lynn Carrington is involved in. We need all the support from all the people. Next week, Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, that's UTC -4, we'll be spending some time with Christian McBride. Thank you both, and we're signing off.